Hello, I'm Jackie Lockie, your financial planning maestro. This series of podcasts is aimed at financial planning professionals and also those who are looking to enter the financial planning profession. We will be talking during the podcast about all things certified financial planner certification related, talking to other CFPs around the world, and also we will be dropping in on some new entrants who've just entered the financial planning profession, and we'll be checking up along the way on a regular basis with them to see how they're getting on. I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Hello and welcome. I'm Jackie Lockie, your financial planning maestro. In today's podcast, we are talking about the assessment process for gaining your CFP. And this is our fourth mini Ask the Experts series. And I'm joined again by Chris Wicks, who is a trainer with Lockie Consultants. Hello, Chris.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad.
So today we are in the final stages, our fourth podcast, to talk about what happens if somebody isn't successful.
Exactly. And I think, we say this so often with this is a journey. So if you don't pass the first time around, that's totally fine. It's an experience that's shared by many, many people. And you're going to get some learning points out of it, which if you pay careful attention to them, will see you to pass the next time you resubmit it.
Yes, absolutely. So let's recap. Remember that you have 3 bites at the cherry, don't you? You 3 submissions before you have to start with a new case study. So if you don't pass your first submission, then obviously you've got still 2 more. Obviously, we prefer from a course running consultant's point of view that you pass before the third and final submission, because it does get a bit stressful trying to help you through your third and final submission, I can say from personal experience. But if you have given it your all in your first submission and you've fallen slightly short, remember that the overall pass mark is 65%, and you need to get a minimum of 51% for each of the learning outcome sections as well. So you've got to be quite consistent and you've got to be clear and succinct, just as we've talked about on our previous podcast, looking at the different areas to cover. So let's talk briefly about there are 2 different ways to fail, if you like, aren't there, Chris? There's a marginal fail or there's a complete fail.
That's right. So the marginal fails where you actually, you get the right mark, you get the overall pass mark, but you failed individual modules. So obviously you need to look back within the module to see the areas where you've gone wrong and remedy them, literally put them right. And the examiners give feedback on every single module that they fail. They have to give an explanation and reference it as to why they failed that particular section.
Yes.
So you need to pay attention to that.
Yeah. So they're not going to tell you what you have to do to fix it, are they? But they're going to tell you what went wrong, essentially.
I must admit that's absolutely right. That when you're giving the feedback, you have to stop. It's very tempting to say, for goodness sake, this is what you need to do. And we can't do that. So you've got to basically try to give people a pointer as to the things they need to cover off. But you can't really do more than that, can you?
No. So the marginal fail is where you have failed either 1 or 2 learning outcomes and you're within 5% of the pass mark. So you might have gained 65% or more, but it's the critical difference between a fail and a marginal fail is this marginal fail if you failed 1 or 2 of the learning outcomes. So that means that, you are within the next whisker away of passing. Now, what that means is that you then have the option of a shorter window to submit for your next assessment. And then it goes into the pool of assessments for the assessors to look at earlier than it otherwise would be, because normally if you were a wider fail, for example, you would have a full 10 weeks to submit your plan again for reassessment. So it's in a rolling 10 weeks for you to create your plan, 12 weeks for the CISI to assess it, 10 weeks for you to amend your plan, 12 weeks for the CISI to assess it, and then the same again, 10 weeks for you to amend your plan and 12 weeks for the CISI to assess it. but that's for a full fail. But if you've got a marginal fail, then you normally get about 3 to 4 weeks to submit your plan. If you want to, it's optional, so you don't have to. You can still take the 10 weeks if you want to. You don't have to tell the CISI whether you're going to take that shorter window or not. You just send it in by the deadline that they give you. So if they do say, it's a marginal fail, you have the option to send us your revised plan by a particular date, which might be in 3 or 4 weeks' time. If the world overtakes you, or you're not very well, or you're going away on holiday for 2 weeks, or whatever it is, you don't have to take up that option. You can stick with the 10-week one if you want to. So it gives you the option to do that. And then obviously, because you're sending your plan in earlier, you will get your result a lot quicker. So you're probably saving about 6 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks on the expected release date of your result.
And the fact that you have a quicker turnaround on it is not your cue to, slapdash a quick few remedies to it. You need to pay great attention because you have been given a chance to get through it faster, but yes, you really do need to concentrate hard on fixing the problems that have been identified, really.
Yes. And that's a really good point, Chris, because I did have somebody a year or so ago now who got a marginal fail. And one of the areas that they failed on was with their Excel spreadsheets in the retirement planning section. And the spreadsheets were fundamentally, they'd made an error and left an error in. And whilst a lot of all of the extra component parts were all fine, they picked up the marks there in those particular sections, but in the retirement planning, they dropped themselves down a hole regarding, looking at the baseline calculations and then making recommendations. So they got marginal fails in those areas. So they got under 50%, but the under 50% was caused by a fundamental error in their spreadsheets.
That actually sounds like I may have marked that one because I seem to remember it. But anyway.
But that means that that's quite a lot of work. And it depending on what your workload is, whether you have planned out time, to tackle any resubmission, then that can cause you a big headache in order to make that 3 or 4 week submission window, can't it? And so I actually said to the candidate at the time, I don't think you should, unless you've got a completely clear diary, basically for the next 2 weeks, I don't think you should take up that, rapid reassessment window. Just do it in the 10-week period. And then they kind of went away and had a thought about whether, move their client meetings out of the way and so that they could devote that time to it. But, as opposed to other people, their spreadsheets will be fine. And it's the lack of explanation or recommendations that they've made so it's the wording of the plan that needs changing rather than the fundamental calculations. So you need to establish, if you're in that situation, what's the cause of the problem? Is it because there's a problem in your spreadsheets? In which case, if you're, not the world's whiz with Excel, which most of us aren't, then, you're going to need that extra time potentially to think it through and revisit why you did what you did. Because obviously 12 weeks has passed, hasn't it? So probably, everything's drained out of my ears in 12 weeks, what happened 12 weeks ago. So it's completely understandable that, you by the time you've sent your first submission in, you just don't want to see this candidate, this client again. And so it can be quite hard work to get back into it.
I think you mean a really interesting point. It is the case actually that, sometimes you will fail a module for having got something wrong at the beginning of it, won't you?
Yes.
So you get something wrong at the beginning of it, and then that trickles all the way down through the whole module. And everything in it fails because they all tie back to this thing that you got wrong. So if you can identify what that is, and the examiner is going to try and point out to you, well, very often the feedback will be the same for a whole series of points, because they all come back to the same thing that you've actually got wrong, So if you fix that, the rest should fall into place, But that still needs you to sort of engage with it really actively. We can't say this often enough, can we? You really have to use your critical reasoning to the best of your ability, think hard about it, which is going to make you tired. But if you invest in doing that, you'll get a better outcome, really.
Yes. And the other thing to remember is that if for any of the sections that you have already passed, and the CISI will colour them green for you, if you've got over 51% or more in each of those sections, unless there is you're still shy of the overall pass mark, when you've amended the sections that you failed, that should lift you past the pass mark. So you don't have to look in any great detail unless you want to, but it's not compulsory for you to look in any great detail in the sections that are coloured green, the ones that you have passed. Because, and this is really important to remember, that the CISI assessors and the CISI as a whole, they cannot fail you on any of the assessment criteria that you have already passed. So they cannot move the goalposts and go, right, well, Jackie, you did it in this case study, in this submission, but actually you've changed it, you've changed your recommendations, and therefore it has a knock-on effect in the other sections. Now, that might be true. They might have a knock-on effect in the other sections, but if you've passed those other sections already, you don't then have to change those other sections. Because what happened in the past was the goalpost would be moved and you'd have to change the other sections. You could be reassessed on areas that you had passed. And it was just a nightmare because you'd make a minor mistake. Then you'd fail that second submission. And it was extremely hard to pass overall. So it was deemed not to be fair. And actually, it's not really fair. This is a learning experience in a situation that, slightly fictitious that you're probably not going to see again, isn't it?
That's right. So it's important that you pay attention. I must admit, you're dead right. In the past, of course, the papers used to get sent to different markers.
Yes.
So that would compound it, because then you get people with different views. Because at the end of the day, it is people marking it.
Yeah.
And they're doing their best to do it objectively and follow the standards. But, the standards are obviously open to interpretation, aren't they?
Yes.
And so you will get people who will fail things that were previously passed, but not anymore. So there you go.
And that's the other good point, is that any second or third submissions will be sent back to the same assessor, won't they?
That's right. And so, but what you can sometimes get, because there's, you've commented here about not getting cross. The assessor, is doing it objectively, and the feedback that they've given you really is meant to be helpful to you. They're not gratuitously making comments to sort of just somehow satisfy themselves. They are actually trying to help you. So do pay careful attention, because when we see things coming back a third time, often it's because you've given some feedback and then no one's paid any attention to it. The candidate's not paid attention to it.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting, isn't it? So I think, you put in the 150 to 200 hours as a candidate, you put your submission in, you get it marked, you get it back. And, it's kind of like the teacher with their red pen. You feel, as the person receiving that feedback, that you're basically being told off. But that's not you have to get it out of your head that that's not the intention of the assessors. They're trying to help you pass. They're not trying to stop you from passing. So, they will make page and paragraph reference, make sure, obviously, when you submitted your plan, you do actually label, your pages so that they can give you a page reference. Then they're doing what they can to help you. They can't tell you what to do to fix it, but they can tell you where you went wrong. Maybe some of the things, if you've made, maybe a technical error, for example, they will tell you that there is a technical error there. They will tell you, my favorite area, estate planning, where people go wrong. They will tell you the IHT calculations are incorrect. They're not just going to go, oh, well, the IHT sections, don't really like the look of those calculations. They will say they are incorrect. So you need to be careful when you're reading the feedback, that whether it is the assessor is telling you something is incorrect or whether something is missing or vague. Because a lot of people will read the feedback, they get themselves annoyed, they don't sleep on it, and then they start either complaining to the CISI or they think that the feedback says that they're wrong, where actually the feedback says you haven't been clear. And they're two very different things, aren't they?
Exactly. So read the feedback carefully and plan what you're going to do, and try to make sure that when you've made your corrections, make your corrections and then go back and check that the corrections actually do address the comments made by the marker.
Yes.
You are actually able, are you not? If you really don't understand, I've had this. If somebody doesn't actually understand the feedback given by an examiner, you can go back to the CISA and ask them, and then the examiner will give further clarification, won't they?
Yes, they can do. But if you do that, you do it in the knowledge that it'll be 2 or 3 weeks before you hear anything. So you must continue to make the changes to your plan anyway, because otherwise you'll be out of time. If you're on a 10-week window and you wait 3 weeks, before you do anything, unless you're on holiday or something, then you're just wasting time, aren't you, when you could have fixed it in that time.
So we come back again to time management, don't we?
Yeah.
That if you don't pass, you've got a job to do and you need to allocate time to making sure you fix the issues. You know, it's highly unlikely for most candidates, they won't have completely fluffed it, most of them, but they will have got certain things wrong that they need to identify. The examiner's notes are there to tell them what to do, and they need a plan of action for the things they need to do to put it right, don't they?
Yes. And actually, it's really interesting. I was interviewing somebody on the podcast only last week, and the podcast's going to go out in a couple of weeks, actually. They were saying that actually they assumed that they were going to fail on their first assessment. And so they looked up on the CISI website when they would get their results. And when they got their results, you know, they planned ahead in their diary to block out time to fix their first assessment for the second submission deadline. So they had it in their diary already, and then they passed on their first submission. So I said to them, "What are you doing?" And they said, "I don't know, I don't care, but I've got all this time back."
But it is true, though. I mean, the thing is that we're all ferociously busy in what we're doing in our day-to-day lives. And the only way we can get things like this done is to carve out time in there, in our diaries to do it, but also make sure that we actually do then use the time we've carved out to do the jobs, and also plan, not just block off time, but plan, you know, break the job down into component parts and allocate each component to a specified amount of time so that you can then get through it.
Yes. And on reflection, most people tell me that, you know, after getting annoyed with themselves and annoyed with the assessors behind the scenes when they first get their feedback, if they sleep on it, leave it the weekend, you know, the feedback's released on the Thursday. I normally tell people, you know, don't start getting all hot under the collar about it. You know, put your angry goggles on and fire off emails to the CISI, sleep on it, leave it the weekend, you know, look at your plan on Monday and look at the feedback and ask yourself honestly, is it fair cop? 9 times out of 10, most people go, yep, absolutely, you know, fair dues. And I'm just going to knuckle down and sort it out. And, you know, when you're thinking about submitting, then think about the color of the font that when you're making any amendments. And that is that if you just bury your amendments in the text that already exists, then the assessor is going to have to wade through the whole plan again, and makes it really difficult from a time management point of view to find where you have made those amendments, and actually easy not to spot them if the plans look broadly the same, because they'll get a copy of the first submission and the second submission. So you don't want them to have to play detective. So use a different color font. I normally say to people, don't use red. That's just me. I think it's quite, you know, like somebody shouting at me. But if you use blue or something like that, or maybe highlight the text paragraphs in a different color, then you should be absolutely fine, shouldn't you?
I think that's a really excellent suggestion. And don't use red. I'm colorblind. There's no use using red for me because I wouldn't be able to tell, to be honest with you. But I do think that the broader point about flagging things up for examiners is that you should be doing that even from when you do your first submission. They're going to have to read through your work, and you know, you need to lead them through it so that they can pick up on all the things you want them to pick up on.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you do your initial submission, and then absolutely when you then do your rewrite, make sure that they can clearly see how you've changed the things that they've asked you to change, and that'll then help them, you know, because as I say, it's not a machine marking it, it's a person marking it.
No. Yeah, and the same person normally marking it.
And they could miss it otherwise. If you bury it under a whole lot of waffle, then they'll just miss the point, and then you'll fail again, you know. Yeah.
And you've still got your 60 pages. So if you're up against your 60-page limit before, you're going to have to trim out some bits. So, you know, trim out a bit from the, you know, introduction at the start, maybe trim out a bit from your review paragraph or something like that in order to keep it down under those 60 pages as well. So, Chris, finally, is there anything else that I've forgotten to tell everybody? Or I think we've covered it all.
I think you've covered everything extremely comprehensively.
Excellent. Right. Well, we will leave it there then. We hope that this series of podcasts helps you all gain your CFP license, become a CFP professional in the not too distant future. And good luck from the pair of us. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks. Take care.
It's really interesting, isn't it, to listen to different people who have different experiences of gaining their Certified Financial Planner certification, or maybe developing the financial planning profession at large. If you know anybody who you think might be interested in listening to any of these podcasts, then please do pass on our details. That's it for me. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. See you again soon. Bye for now.